What I'm looking for technology to do is reduce the amount of time from the idea to the execution, whether that's with a camera or whether that's with an editing system. So in the case of the Red, to have a, you know, super high resolution digital camera that seems to really embrace available light was what I've been waiting for. And in the case of Che, it was what I really needed because we just didn't have a lot of time.
Before we started the shoot, I was at Red for about a month, maybe learning the camera, maybe a little bit more before we actually went to Spain. And this was basically a learning process for me and actually everyone else at Red at the time, which was very small, and we were only a handful of people who were working there. So it was just kind of diving in and seeing, making sure that we could have a camera ready for production, because obviously this was a prototype.
The camera that went over there was basically the first version of the software, which was Build 1, and it had kind of the bare bones of camera functionality. So it did 24 frames a second. It didn't support time code at that point.
The problem was, of course, these things were basically not ready. I mean, if we hadn't moved our shoot start by 1 week, then we're not shooting with the camera. So it was that tight.
I was worrying about all these little details of, well, how exactly are we going to sync the sound, and, what about this aspect of the workflow, and how can we make it the most efficient? And, the guys at Red and Steven were, thinking about, well, is the camera going to shoot, 24 frames a second? Are we going to get the material that we want? And, is the camera going to melt in the middle of the desert? So these sort of things. So the sort of my world of these sort of relative minutia of our workflow sort of were so small compared to this looming issue of, is this camera going to actually work?
While we were prepping at Red, I was getting very nervous, or myself and the other people we were with were getting very nervous about not having another camera or a backup system in Spain. And I think probably every other day we were trying to call Steve and saying, don't you want to have a 900s or a film camera, a Panavision camera? Don't you have something in case these cameras don't work? Even Jim Gennard, the head of Red, I think, was telling Steven it might be good to have a backup. And of course, Steven's response each time was, no, we're going to go with the cameras. I completely trust this camera. We're going to make it work.
I was absolutely convinced that we had to have these cameras for this film, that this was necessary on a creative level for me to have these cameras, and I was willing to put up with anything in order to get them, and I really didn't care if there were problems, or if the heat was an issue and we had to put ice packs. I just didn't care. I just felt like I have to have these, and to the extent of refusing to accept delivery of a film camera package in Spain. I wouldn't even let the production order them. And so it got pretty tense there for a while, because people were wondering what we were going to shoot on if the Red wasn't ready. But I was, I don't know, I just wouldn't be denied.
We had a test a week before, about 5 days before shooting, and during that test, we encountered drop frames, which is basically what happens this is from a film perspective. You basically get a scratch negative in the middle of one take, and it can be for one frame or it can be for many frames, and you usually get what's called a green screen of death, which is just a blank green screen. So we found out that these compact flash cards, which were the same thing you use in a digital camera, these little cards, were dropping frames, and we're shooting in 5 days.
We're having the drop frame issue when we were testing I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of significant, but I'm sure they'll fix it. I wasn't really worried about it.
That whole week that we were doing pre-production was mostly spent trying to figure out how to fix that. In addition to kind of adding features and doing all the other kind of special things that we needed for the production.
Whereas you worry in film about the film being flash, there's scratches in the film. Here was another worry of whether whether like a computer can have something and can just disappear.
So one night I get an email about probably 11 p.m. and at this point I was still living in Holland, and so I was pretty close to Spain where they were shooting. And the email said, okay, we need the SWAT team to go to Spain and make sure to support the production.
That's one of those things where as long as you know that something's going wrong, like the good news was whenever on the very rare occasion when there would be a frame drop, an indicator would light up and we would know, oh, we got to check that tag. And sometimes we would check it and it would be fine. But at least, unlike sometimes when you're shooting film and you have to wait a day or two, or in our case, it would have been a couple of days because we were in such a remote location. We knew when we were having a problem. And to me, that's, as long as you know that, you're fine. Then you know what to do. It's when you find out 2 days later that you had a problem that you're in trouble.
The crazy thing about it was that the day that we were supposed to go to the production set and start shooting, we got the fix for the camera at 5 o'clock in the morning, and so we were still completely up all night, kind of trying to figure it out because we knew we were going to start shooting the next day, and we got the fix at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then we got 2 hours of sleep.
I think it was the first day they were shooting in a ravine, and there was an army assembling. Hundreds of guys in military, outfits and guns, and then they sort of realized, man, there's an army of people assembling in a, ravine, and if this isn't just shooting, test charts of color charts anymore. This is like hundreds of people, and people flying in equipment from all over the world and stuff, and this thing better work.
We have the cameras all ready to go, and our first shot that we have is a huge shot of 800 Bolivian troops descending on Che. This is the climactic scene which he was going to be captured, which of course this is the end of the second film that we're shooting first. So it's this big panoramic shot seeing all of these troops descending, and about 10 minutes into the shot there's a big warning on the camera that flashes body hot, body hot, body hot. And like, uh-oh, what's going on? And I guess it brought us to our biggest problem is that these cameras were overheating.
When we built this camera, we basically had to get the fastest FPGAs we could and a couple of them. And so it was the fastest thing you can get, which also generated the most heat, just because it's doing 4K, and that's a huge amount of data it has to process in real time. So it's got a lot of processing power. It's probably equivalent to a whole bunch of regular computers stuffed inside of a small camera body.
And of course, here we are. The temperature is probably about 110 degrees in Spain, and it's very dry heat, and obviously very, very hot. So when it started flashing body hot, I knew that we were going to have to come up with a solution right away.
And so we were trying all sorts of things, changing the body, changing the ventilation and all.
I got a call in the edit room, maybe it was the first day, from one of the guys at Red, and asking, is there any way you could get us some supplies sent out here? What do you need? And they needed a hot glue gun, a soldering iron, and surgical quality ice packs. And I just sort of remember as like a wish list thinking, oh man, that's not the wish list that you want to hear.
I didn't care if I had to poke a hole in a an ice chest and stick a lens out one side of it. Like, that's how much I wanted to use these cameras.
We ended up doing is basically the movie was a handheld show, so we would get a bag of ice, we'd put a bag of ice in, we put it on, we keep it on an apple box. In between takes, we'd shut the camera down, we'd put it on ice, we'd have another ice pack on the top of the camera, and basically we would wait to shoot and turn the camera on and shoot the shot, and hopefully it would work, and that would be it.
Turned out that the temperature sensor was in the wrong place. So even though it was saying it was too hot, it actually wasn't even close to getting hot. So what turned out to be a huge problem for us in the first 3 or 4 days was actually a completely false problem.
The first shot, Stephen recorded. I got the compact flash in my hand, and I rushed to my laptop to make sure that everything was okay. We had an image, and there were no problems with it, and there weren't any problems with it. And so it was a big relief to to see the images come up on the laptop screen, and everyone was looking, and it was like it was perfect.
Ultimately, a lot of our worry, seemed unfounded, and but there were definitely moments in the beginning where we were very unsure of what was going on.
I think probably any other director would have said, "Let's get these cameras out of here. Let's once there's one problem, let's get the Panavision in. Let's get an area in. Let's bring another camera in. I don't want to deal with this." Instead, Stevens, calmly said, "What should we do? What can we do about this?" And we could think about having a solution, and we came to solutions. And I think without Stevens' patience, it probably would not have worked. And I think it shows a lot of cojones for Steven to kind of say, okay, I'm gonna do this really important film, but I'm also gonna use a new technology for it.
I think my role in the story of the Red camera has been to constantly push what the camera can do to an extent that Jim and all of his guys are continually sort of saying, oh yeah, that's something we got to deal with. I mean, we were really, if you were looking to see what these cameras could do and what they could handle, you couldn't ask for a better test case scenario, because we were really beating the shit out of these cameras.
In the countryside, it was extremely dusty. There were, kind of spiders everywhere, spiders getting into the camera and dust and everything, and we were cleaning them pretty much every night.
In these prototype cameras, there was no sealant between the glass and the sensor. So basically a lot of dust, we were in very dusty environments, and a lot of dust was getting in between the sensor and the glass.
And we didn't know why, because it was supposed to have a seal. And so we found out eventually that because these were the prototypes, that they hadn't finished a couple of things. And that one thing was the seal around the sensor.
So I asked Dean, what should we do? How should we handle this? And Dean took a screwdriver on the butt of the screwdriver and banged it on the top of the camera. So basically, that was our way of doing it, and it worked. We'd go in the morning, we'd look, and we'd see that there would be dirt on the sensor, and we'd bang a screwdriver on the top, and it'd kind of be like an Etch-a-Sketch, and we'd kind of wait to see where the dust would settle, and hopefully it would settle in a point where we could shoot, and that it actually wouldn't be photographed. And actually, there's a few shots in Che where you can see spots, dust on the sensor, and that was what was probably from that.
It started out originally as a 2K camera, and we were trying to make a camera that was a full-frame sensor, 4-motion picture, kind of Super 35 size sensor. And as it evolved through the design phases, we discovered that we could increase our expectations of what we could get, so we pushed it up to a 4K camera. at that time, the camera could only shoot 24 frames a second. Since then, we've increased that to 30 at 4K, and then also added the ability to do 120 frames a second at 2K. And then we've improved the quality of the image at least a couple of times. So just by the stuff that we've learned over time, we've just kept improving the image quality. So the goal at some point was not just to make the best camera that we could, but to also make one that people could use practically. And that meant introducing 4K compression. And then once we went down the compression route, it was how can we get the best compression possible? How can we get the best compression with the most flexibility? And then ultimately it led to how can we get compressed RAW?
Raw recording process basically means that we take, the image from the sensor, do as little as possible to it before recording it to disk. When Stephen was shooting, he got to see the image as it would later be seen in post. There's more tweaking possible in post to push it in certain, directions that you maybe can't do on set. But in general, he was seeing what the image would look like in post.
There's a big, pissing contest that's been going on for years, about resolution, 2K, 4K, 5K, 6K. I mean, I've had these discussions with Red, where they go, oh, we got the new camera coming up, it's 5K. And I go, 2K is more than I need, pretty much. Like, that's really great, but I don't really need more than a full-on 2K image. I can't see, my eyes can't resolve beyond that. So I don't know what a lot of these discussions are about when you get beyond 4K. I don't know what we're looking at.
On the second film, we had production cameras by that point, so it definitely had come up in quality, and absolutely mechanically there were a lot of problems that the first prototype had that were alleviated in the second camera. But the biggest difference was that we shot the first film anamorphic and the second film was spherical. So the anamorphic film, which was the one we shot second, was actually using less of the sensor. It only used 60% of the sensor because we only use a square part of it, and then you stretch it out for the anamorphic. And I have to say that it's just a different look, and it's an anamorphic look. I think it gave it more, to me, it gave it more, actually, a more filmic look, whereas the second one, to me, the spherical one, I wouldn't say had more of a digital look, but was more of a what I guess would be more of a red look.
The resolution is so good that often I find myself wanting to back it off a little bit. It can under certain circumstances be almost unnaturally sharp. Now, in the case of part two, where if we were outside and the sun was shining, I would just close the aperture down to 16.5, because that was sort of the aesthetic of that film. Whereas on part one, no matter what circumstance we were shooting, it was 2.8 by design. And what I liked about part one, and what I've liked about shooting with anamorphic lenses on the Red since then, is it softens it a little bit so that it just doesn't have that kind of almost creepy sharpness to it. I'd either worked with or seen almost all the high-end digital cameras before we started working with the Red. And they all had various issues for me, the biggest one being the size. Often I'd be presented with what was supposed to be the newest, most cutting-edge digital motion picture camera, and I would just look at it and go, well, you got to be kidding me. This is bigger than a Panaflex. It's supposed to be smaller. That's what we all want. That's the point. And so, for me at least, the Red had addressed this issue of size and weight because it seemed to me if this is supposed to be an evolution and this is supposed to be the next step, then this thing ought to be small.
For Che, which we were hiking around in the jungle, I was able to put everything in backpacks, and I could almost put all the lenses, put a couple batteries, a few cards in a backpack, and I have the camera, and I'm ready to shoot for a full day instead of, traipsing with a big 35 millimeter camera. And in fact, I know Stephen originally wanted to shoot Che in 65, and I could never see us not never see us, but it would have been a whole nother task to bring 65 millimeter cameras, and I don't know if we would have got the same shots that we would have just because of the size of the camera. The Red camera itself is about 9 pounds, and we probably added another 10 pounds, so I'd say ours would be 20 maybe compared to 30 to 35 for a handheld camera, film camera, or another digital camera. I think for Stephen, he likes to shoot from the hip, and he could literally shoot from the hip with his camera and hold it in his hand, and I think that's one aspect, and I know the other aspect also is having control on the other end in the post side and being able to edit and being able to color time and being able to do all these things without having to send it to a lab.
So one of the biggest differences as far as production is that you don't need to tether the camera to a huge set of drives. So obviously from DP's perspective or director's perspective, it allows you to basically treat the camera as you would treat a small handheld video camera.
Drives were not available at our time of shooting, so we could only use 8 gigabyte cards, compact flash cards. We had about 237 for the shoot. We had to make sure that there was enough to go. We were in very remote locations in Spain, and we had to make sure that there was enough time to go back to Madrid, make a copy on an LTO machine, and get back to us. So we figured out 237 would work.
It also wasn't as simple as simply buying more cards, because we actually at that time had run out of vendors who had the compact flash cards that we could use in the cameras. We sort of scoured the world's supply of 16 gigabyte or 8 gigabyte compact flash cards that could operate at the speed needed for the camera.
After we finished the card, we would give it to our loader, Virginia, and she would make 2 backups on set on hard drives, and then it would be sent to the editor.
We'd load those onto the SAN, transcode them, sync them, and the goal was that by the next day, when Stephen would wrap the following day's shooting, he would have sunk dailies to edit that day.
When we were shooting part 1 in Puerto Rico, we had some long drives to and from the set, and I would be cutting on a laptop in the car footage that we had shot the previous day. So, if we'd shoot on a Monday, Tuesday morning in the drive out to the set, I would be editing Monday morning's footage. It was just, I figure it's, a 70-minute drive, I can be working. And so the ability to have like a flash drive hooked into my, Apple laptop, and I have some headphones on, I'm just cutting in the car. That was a great, that saved us. It just saved me a lot of time. It just, even if I felt like, even if I just take a rough pass at 1 or 2 scenes, that's 1 or 2 scenes.
It was definitely a full 24-hour day, for a couple of weeks. It was basically, we'd have call time at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then so you'd be there during the whole day, and we'd wrap maybe at about 6 or 7 at night, come back, have some dinner, and then pretty much get back to work on stuff like getting new features in, getting things fixed, improving things. At one point, when we were going through the most troubleshooting, I think we had something like 800 emails go back and forth in just like half a day. Just everyone communicating constantly back and forth between everyone, just trying to get get everything working as fast as possible. I was hoping to have more communication. Pretty much all I had at the time was my small BlackBerry, and there was no cell phone access or anything. But there happened to be one small, tiny patch of 2 feet by 2 feet where I could send a text message. And so half the day I would be standing in this patch, kind of sending updates and asking questions and getting, technical stuff back and forth and all. And I was just standing in this one patch with the phone kind of facing a certain direction, and I would be able to communicate.
I guess the thing that I like most about, you know, shooting digitally and posting digitally is the fact that the material sort of never leaves the hands of the production. That there's no moment at which, someone else has access to your material and can do something with it. Or I just like the fact that nothing ever left the editing room. That it was all being done there. We were taking the files, cloning them, baking them, putting them into the editing system, and we were controlling everything. That aspect of it I really like a lot, just from a security level.
We're very accustomed to backing up data, but dealing with what is essentially original negative takes sort of the traditional backing up of projects and offline media to a whole nother level. When you think about the financial worth of, and consequences of losing a day's worth of shooting, it's something very different. On set, we would copy to one set of drives. The compact flash cards, which are what you record to in camera, would come to the edit room. We would then copy those to another set of drives and then start making 2 sets of LTO3 backup tapes. That process was time consuming. We probably wouldn't finish the tape backups for a couple days, but we had a certain number of compact flash cards, and the goal was that by the time that we would actually erase the cards that we'd shot on and reuse them on set, we would have 3 sets of spinning disc backups and 2 sets of tape backups. Finishing was a whole new arena. We were able to work in ways that we just absolutely wouldn't have been able to if we were working with film and needed to constantly scan new pieces of negative and deal with vaulting and unvaulting negative and messengering it with bonded messengers to different labs, and just a level of efficiency that was really ultimately far outweighed the complexities of dealing with a lot of the new technology, because we had access to all this original material. It allowed us to do a large part of the DI in-house, and more importantly than the cost, what that allowed is for Steven to do a lot of the play with the color and do a lot of the color grading himself, and have access to a color grading system in our editing suite. And I think that allowed a level of freedom that is really important.
It's very satisfying for me to be able to physically turn the knobs and get it looking the way I want. So I'm glad to be able to make that part of editorial, to make color correcting a sort of organic part of editorial, since I'm my own cinematographer and sometimes my own editor. I really like the idea of the stuff shows up at our office, and a few months later we walk out of there with a file that we hand over, and they turn it into a film print. That's a very I like the efficiency of that.
From where we started 2 years ago to where we are now, the post workflow has continuously been improving. So, and we've done that with the camera also. Just try to improve the camera, improve the firmware, keep adding features, just constantly push what we can do. And the same with software, introducing the Red Rocket card and making the post workflow easier and easier and easier.
What's happening now with a lot of the DI world is sort of what happened with offline a couple of years ago, where it stops being this $100,000 system that exists only in a facility where you have to go and rent a room by the hour to have access to it, and people edit on their laptops these days, and we're still a couple steps away from doing a DI conform on your laptop, but that's where we're moving with it.
I've found myself, especially in post-production, as opposed to using technology to merely accelerate the process, what I like to use it for is to get to a place of reflection more quickly. Meaning, if you're cutting on an Avid or you're cutting on Final Cut Pro, the ability to have a version of the film quickly and then use that extra time that you've bought yourself to sort of sit back and either look at it or even leave it alone for a while, as opposed to just, we're going to finish faster. I think on a micro level, movies are as well cut now as they've ever been. I think on a macro level, something's getting lost, though. This is what I'm talking about, is taking advantage of the speed of the new technology to afford you time to sit back and look at something and not work on it for a while. Because I see a lot of movies that I think on a macro level are sort of misshapen. You know what I mean? Like, the individual scenes are cut well and things seem to work, but I feel like nobody's taking the sort of time that you have to take to watch it end to end over and over again to really get a sense of what the rhythm of the movie is as an entire piece. I feel like we have movies that have more edits in them than they've ever had before, and they're longer than they've ever been before. And that's strange to me.